If you have not yet, you'll notice the 7 C's of history as you go through the museum. We walk you through biblical history, and as we do, we're answering skeptical questions of this age, showing God's Word, again, is true from cover to cover. Because God's Word is definitely under attack. It truly is. And that's not weird. It's been under attack since Genesis chapter 3, when the devil said to Eve, "Did God really say?" But the way the attack is occurring today in our culture is the enemy is attacking the history of the Bible. And he's doing that to undermine the authority of the Bible, to undermine the gospel that's based in that authority. Because if you cannot believe the Bible's history, why on earth would you trust what it says about salvation? All right? And so that's why it's so important we are prepared to give answers where the Bible is being attacked today. And that's why we need answers to questions like this one. Do animals evolve? The good old crocoduck, who doesn't love that, right? And to answer that question, you must define the word evolution, which is what we're going to do during this session. But according to our culture and even our pop culture, no, this is an absolute fact. As an example, watch this clip from a show called Friends.
Whoa, 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 whoa. But you don't believe in evolution?
Nah, not really.
You don't believe in evolution?
I don't know. It's just, monkeys, Darwin. It's a nice story. I just think it's a little too easy.
Too easy? The process of every living thing on this planet evolving over millions of years from single-celled organisms is too easy?
Yeah, I just don't buy it.
Excuse me. Evolution is not for you to buy, Phoebe. Evolution is scientific fact, like the air we breathe, like gravity.
All right, there you have it. But is evolution like air or gravity? Well, it depends on what you mean by the word evolution, because it has multiple meanings. And again, that's not weird. Most words have multiple meanings depending on context. But there's only one meaning to the word evolution that is scientific. There's only one meaning to the word evolution that is observable, testable, repeatable, and falsifiable. All the other possible meanings to the word evolution are actually believed by faith. So what we're going to do during this session is look at the possible different meanings to the word evolution. I'll break it into 5 basic categories. Starting with the first type, you'll need to get the origin of everything, go through different types leading up to the origin of life. And we're going to talk about what we observe versus what is believed by faith. And when we do that, we see that God's word is confirmed time and time and time again. So we'll start with the first type of evolution you would need, something some might call cosmic evolution, the origin of time, space, and matter. And according to the evolutionists, it all began with a Big Bang. You heard about the Big Bang? The idea that around 14 billion years ago, nothing exploded and produced everything. That's what the theory suggests. That's what's taught in our textbook. Like this one. This one says around 18 to 20 billion years ago. By the way, that number changes all the time. Nowadays, it's around 14 billion. They say all the matter in the universe. Quick little side note here. The word universe comes from 2 Latin words. Uni, which means single, and verse, spoken sentence. Do you realize that we live in a single spoken sentence? And God said, let there be. That'll preach, won't it? You can take that back to your pastor and let him run with that, all right? Just thought I'll throw that in there. But this is all the matter in the universe was concentrated to a very dense, very hot region that may have been smaller than a period on this page. And then for some unknown reason, that region exploded, and that's called the Big Bang. But where did the dot come from? Where did the matter originally come from? Discover Magazine 2002. Where did it all come from? And if you can see the gray caption box here, it says actual size of universe, essentially right after birth. And they know that from the digital photographs they took while they were there. All right, so they can show us now. But underneath it says this: the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing, zero, nada. And as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. That is the essence of the idea of the Big Bang, cosmic evolution. To give you a summary of this idea, let me show you a couple of clips I've put together from National Geographic, the Discovery Channel, featuring the illustrious Dr. Stephen Hawking talking about this idea of the Big Bang.
For the first time in human history, we are able to describe how this world we see around us came into being. Our theories take us back to the time when the universe was born, but people always want to know what came before. There have been various ideas, but for me, most attractive is that the universe was spontaneously created out of absolutely nothing.
Less than a billionth of a second after the Big Bang, a bubble much smaller than a fraction of an atom forms. This is the universe.
And then something happened, triggering the most colossal explosion in history. In a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second, the universe grew from the size of that tiny point to something billions of miles across. This colossal blast created everything, all the matter we see in the universe today.
Did anybody notice the magic hat they used towards the beginning? I thought that's kind of very fitting. And of course, with CGI, you can make it all look very real. But of course, no one was there besides God himself. And really, you get two options as far as what you choose to believe about the origin of the universe. You can either choose to believe the word of the infallible, inerrant God, who says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or you can choose to believe the words of fallible men who weren't there, who don't know everything, who say, in the beginning, nothing. You have to start with one of those two starting assumptions. And that's why we say over and over again as a ministry, this is not a science versus religion issue, like it's painted all the time in our culture. It is not. This is actually a religion versus religion issue. This is a battle between the two foundational religious worldviews. Either God's word is true or it's not, and man's word is true. You have to start with one of those two starting assumptions. And that's why, truly, this is ultimately a worldview issue. Because all scientists, whether they're secular or biblical, they got the same evidence in the present. The same rock layers, the same fossils, the same universe, the same distant starlight, so forth and so on. But they interpret those things differently and get different conclusions about where they came from based on their different starting assumptions, based on their different worldviews. And if you start with the wrong assumptions, you will more than likely get the wrong conclusions. Reminds me of the story of a little boy in the doctor's office in the waiting room, waiting with his mom. And he looked across the room and he saw a very pregnant lady. So he walked over to her like little boys do. And he said, "Excuse me, miss, why is your belly so big?" And she said, "Well, I'm having a baby." He said, "And the baby's in your stomach?" She said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, is he a good baby?" She said, "Oh, yeah, he's a real good baby." To which the boy responded in horror, "Well, then why did you eat him?" I know it's silly, right? But get the idea. And guys, secular scientists have reached some really wrong conclusions about certain things, like the age of the earth and the rock layers and the origin of the universe. Why? Because they're starting with the wrong assumptions. The assumptions that assume that this book is not true and that man's word is a better authority. But if you choose to elevate man's word over God's and believe in the idea of the Big Bang, then you have some pretty tough questions to answer. Questions like, where did the matter come from? As we've seen, secular scientists have no good ideas. If evolution is true, then where did the laws of nature come from, right? How do you explain the reality of immaterial realities like laws of nature, laws of logic, laws of morality? If you think matter is all that exists, how do you have immaterial things that are true everywhere? And if you have things like laws of nature, why aren't they evolving over time? Right? If evolution is true and everything changes over time, then why aren't the laws of nature randomly changing over time? Why hasn't gravity changed? I mean, why don't we weigh 10 pounds more than we used to? We might, but it's not because gravity changed. Amen? It's not gravity's fault, all right? But again, secular science has no good idea. And then where did the energy come from to run this place? And not even a good clue to this from the secularists. The reason being is the idea of the Big Bang violates one of the most fundamental laws in science, something called the first law of thermodynamics. And if something is a law in science, here's what that basically means. We have never observed anything to the contrary. Never. And one of the basic tenets of this law is that we have never seen something come from nothing. Never. And I cannot imagine a bigger violation of that scientific law than the idea of nothing exploding and producing everything. Evolution violates many laws of science. That's the first of many we'll see today. But here's the mantra you will hear. If you're watching a program on Nova, National Geographic, reading a textbook, here's what you hear. Yes, we know we don't know all the answers, and yes, it does seem to violate laws of science, but hey, nature found a way, and someday we'll figure out how nature did it. That's what you'll hear over and over again. So after nature found a way for that, then you need the origin of stars and planets. We'll start with the stars first. Do you realize that no one's actually never observed a star forming? I could show you probably 100 quotes like this one from other secular scientists who say the silent embarrassment of modern astrophysics is that we don't know how even a single one of these stars managed to form. Never actually seen the process take place. Now, there's a hypothesis called the nebula hypothesis that suggests, okay, we got these big gas and dust clouds out in space, and they begin to collapse and spin. And as they do, the gas and dust run into each other, causes a whole bunch of friction, starts a fusion in the middle of the cloud. That's where the star is born. And then the gas and dust clump together around the star, and that forms your planets. It's called the nebula hypothesis. And there are beautiful nebula out in space, gas and dust clouds that are gorgeous to look at. They're typically huge, normally light years across. But here is the thing. As we observe these clouds in the present with real observable science, do you think on their own that they are expanding always or contracting always? What do you think? Expanding. Why? You do the math. The pressure of the gas pushing outwards is over 1 million times greater than the force of gravity trying to draw it in. And we all know that gas can be very powerful. And you can insert your own joke there. All right? But you get the idea. And then even though we've never seen a star actually form, it's been estimated that there are enough of them out there that every person on planet Earth could own 11 trillion to themselves. And God knows each one by name. What an amazing thought. But to get that many stars, even in 20 billion years, we should see around 6 million forming every minute. We should observe 100,000 every second. We can't see one. But we do see them blow up from time to time. It's called a nova or a supernova if it's a really big explosion. Now, right now, on average, a star blows up around every 30 years. So if we've been around for billions of years, we should see millions of supernova remnants. How many do we observe? Well, we see around 205. That's around 6,000 years worth of supernova remnants. Pretty interesting, huh? Yeah. But again, we've never seen that process, but nature found a way. And then nature found a way for the planets as well. And again, they suggest planets formed in that nebula hypothesis. But if their theory is correct, then due to numerous laws of science, the planets and the sun should be rotating in the same direction. And we know they are not. Uranus, Venus, and possibly Pluto rotate backwards. And also think about this. If our sun and our planets in our solar system, if they're all made of the same gas and the same dust, then why are they so different from each other? Different in sizes, elemental composition, atmosphere, so forth and so on. And also, according to the evolutionary guess, the sun should be spinning very quickly in the middle of our solar system, and the planet's orbiting fairly slowly in comparison. And what we observe is the opposite. The sun rotates slowly, and the planets orbit fairly quickly. And it's perfect just the way it is. Because since the sun rotates slowly, it doesn't fling its matter into the solar system. And therefore, we don't get burned alive. And I hear that's good, right? And since the planets orbit really quickly, we don't get sucked in by the sun's gravitational pull. Again, we don't get burned alive. Again, it's a good thing, and it's perfect just the way it is, but a real conundrum for the evolutionist. But nature found a way. And then you need organic evolution. This is a biggie. Somehow you got to get life from non-life. Paul Davies, a well-recognized expert in this field, not a creationist, says nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. No even good ideas. And it's such a problem that many are starting to buy into the idea of panspermia or directed panspermia. Have you heard about that? I bet you have, even if you don't think you have. You've probably seen at least 5 movies where this is kind of the central theme. It's the idea that aliens came and seeded life on this planet, and it evolved from there. To give you an example of this, I want to show you a clip from the movie Expelled, narrated by Ben Stein, or hosted by Ben Stein. Anybody remember Ben Stein? Anyone? Bueller, it's an old reference. Yeah, okay. But there you go. But in this clip, he's interviewing a guy named Richard Dawkins. You know who Richard Dawkins is? Very good. All right. He's what I like to call an atheist evangelist. He feels like it's his purpose in life to let you know you have no purpose in life, all right? It's just kind of what it boils down to. And he's a smart guy, no doubt about that. But here's something I want you to really think about over and over again through this talk and as you go through the whole Renewathon and so forth. This is not a head issue. It is a heart issue. That's the key thing to keep in mind. He's a smart guy, but it's not a head issue. It's a heart issue. Watch this clip. Listen to what he says. And as you do, just bear in mind the power of your starting assumptions, the power of your worldview.
I put an argument in the book.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry and molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
So he is okay with a creator. He's okay with the creator leaving signs or evidence of his creation through DNA, as long as that creator is not God. So why is Richard Dawkins okay with the idea of aliens creating life and not God? Here's what I would suggest. Because if aliens made us, we are not morally accountable to them. We can still live life how we want. But if God made us, he owns us, he sets the rules, we're accountable to him, and sinful man does not like that idea. Romans 1 says that the unbeliever suppresses the truth inside of them. They know what is true. The creation screams at them. Their inner code, the inner moral code inside of them screams at them. There is a God, but they suppress that truth because they don't want it to be true. And thus, this is not a head issue. It is ultimately a heart issue. That's what we got to keep in mind. But why does he have such a problem with this issue of the origin of life and many other scientists like him? Well, because there's a law in science called the law of biogenesis, which says life only comes from life. That's all we have ever observed. We have never seen a rock give birth to anything. If you do, run away. It's not good, all right? But the Bible says the God who is the author of life, he made all life, and that is perfectly consistent. But this evolution violates this law of science. Also, inside of life, we find staggering amounts of genetic information called DNA. And there's a second law of information which says information always originates from a mind. Now, once you have it, you can make copies of it, but the origin of the information is always from a mind. Yet, evolution suggests that all the information inside living organisms came from inanimate, non-living matter. Evolution violates this law as well. But the mantra will continue. Somehow, nature found a way. Then that leads us to this possible definition to the word, something some people call macroevolution. And this is what most people think of when you say the word evolution. It's the idea of one kind changing into a whole different kind of animal. It's the idea, very commonly suggested today in our textbooks, that all life came from a common ancestor that evolved over millions of years. It's the idea that some dinosaurs evolved into birds. It's the idea that apes and humans today share a common ape-like ancestor from the past. It's sometimes called, we use this definition a lot in the ministry, molecules to man evolution. My favorite definition is the one at the bottom, though. It's the goo to you via the zoo theory. We go from goo to you, how? Through the zoo. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. If you can just remember the word farm, that is the suggested order nowadays of evolution. It is what Darwin ultimately concluded in his book, The Origin of Species, which, by the way, to be fair, Darwin made some decent observations. Nothing new, mind you, and then he reached some really bad conclusions, like this one. that it's a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all space and time should be related to each other. That's right, we are related to birds, to monkeys, bananas, and even nuts, which maybe that explains your family. I don't know, all right? But you get the idea. But hey, this is taught. That's what's taught in our textbooks today. And we see quotes like this one. You are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. Were you feeling depressed today? Did you need some encouragement? There you go, all right? There it is. So let's kind of recap what the evolutionary scenario is asking us to accept as truth. The whole paradigm from a big picture perspective. They're suggesting we believe that around 14 billion years ago, nothing exploded and produced everything. And from the chaos of an explosion, you get the orderliness of the universe, galaxies, solar systems, and that goes against many other known laws of science. And then somehow the Earth formed around 4.5 billion years ago as a hot molten mass. And then it rained on the rocks for millions of years, and those rocks came alive in that organic soup around 3.5 billion years ago. So the rocks came alive, so that means that must be Grandpa or something like that. And then after they came alive, they evolved into all sorts of things from quote-unquote simple single-celled organisms eventually into humans. But we were a lot of things in between. Like Discover Magazine says, 2004 was your ancestor a sea sponge. Inside it declares dogmatically, this is your ancestor. To which I can only respond. Just saying, all right? If you're going to make it that easy. And supposedly man evolved on the scene around 3, maybe 2 million years ago. That number changes a lot. So that's the whole big picture perspective. Now let's focus on this idea of macroevolution. Problems with this idea. Well, here's the first one. I'll let you take that in for a moment. We don't see it happening today, do we? We don't see one kind change into a whole different kind of animal. We don't see the crocodile and the frog, the literal bird dog, all right? We don't see the banana fish or the great white horse, the linaroo, which would be a real interesting critter, the squalosaurus. Let's be glad those aren't around, all right? Be careful of that guy. It'd be horrible to have in your backyard, all right? No, we don't see one kind change into a whole different kind. And here's the thing. If there was an evolutionist up here with me, he'd say, but Bryan, you're being silly. Of course we don't see this happening today because evolution happens too slowly. Well, I would still argue for these great changes over time, there should be some observable change happening even right now. We should still see something. But okay, I'll give you that. Then where should the evidence be for these immense changes over time? It should be where? In the fossil record. There should be literally trillions of these intermediate links all over the place. And guys, they're just not there. We do whole talks on this subject in different areas, but let me just give you one quote to really bring this point home. Dr. Colin Patterson, fossil expert, senior paleontologist at the Natural History Museum over in London, staunch evolutionist, had access to one of the largest fossil collections in the world. And he wrote a book on evolution. But here was the thing. In his book, he included no examples of transitions, not one. And so if someone noticed that, they wrote him a letter that said, sir, you're a staunch evolutionist, you have access to all these fossils, yet you included no examples of transitions in your book. Why? And this was his very honest response. He said, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would have certainly included them. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil. They are just not there. And the honest evolutionists will admit that. And as a matter of fact, this is such a problem for the evolutionists that sometimes some will go to great lengths to make the evidence fit their preconceived ideas. Have you ever heard of Lucy? You've seen the Lucy exhibit as you go through the museum, really well done. The holograms are phenomenal. Australopithecines afarensis just means southern ape. Supposedly, one of the best evidences that humans evolved from ape-like ancestors. But here was the problem. When they found Lucy, all of her bones, all of them, were chimp-like. They were. And as we find related ancestors of Lucy, or species, if you will, they're all chimp-like as well, including her hips. Her hips were angled in such a way that Lucy would walk on all fours normally. She could waddle on 2 legs like chimps today, but then go back to all fours. But her discoverers did not want her to walk on all fours because that's just a chimp. Who cares if you find a dead chimp? They wanted her to walk upright so they can claim she's a hominid, an ape man of some sort. So watch what, again, some scientists did to make it fit their preconceived ideas.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization.
After Lucy died, some of her bones lying in the mud must have been crushed or broken, perhaps by animals browsing at the lakeshore.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
You think? Just keep grinding it down. Eventually, it looks like whatever you want it to look like, right? And here is the thing. Why was the perfect fit an illusion? Because it did not fit their worldview. It did not fit their starting assumptions. And guys, it's not a head issue. It's a heart issue. These are smart guys. They're brilliant. But it's their starting assumptions that gives them the wrong conclusions. That's really what is going on right there. And by the way, I would say this as well about those gentlemen. They're being honest or fair with their worldview, with their starting assumptions that the Bible is not true, that man's word is the authority, evolution must be true. So they're trying to interpret the evidence with that worldview. They're being consistent in their worldview. I would just say they've got the wrong worldview. They need to start with God's word and not man's. That's the bottom line issue. And you know what? Here's another thing, too, when you talk about fossils. Arranging animals or fossils in order on paper does not prove a relationship. Even if you find them buried in a particular order, it does not prove a relationship. If later on you find me buried on top of a hamster, it doesn't mean he's my grandpa, all right? But for those who are convinced that finding things or arranging things in a particular order proves a relationship, I want to show you some of my research. I've been trying to figure out the evolution of the fork. This has been really meaningful to me. It's something I'm really concerned about. And so I've concluded that the fork started off as something like a knife, maybe 500 million years ago. Why the knife? Well, it's the simplest structure, right? Very streamlined, very vertical. That just makes sense. And then over time, because of geological pressures, natural selection, it evolved into the spoon. And you can see the similarities here in the handles right here, right up to this point, though, it starts to change with the curvature of the spoon. Now, there used to be bigger spoons. But they died out millions of years ago during a mass extinction event. Now we just have smaller spoons, in case you're wondering about that. And then over time, because of more erosion, more natural selection, so forth and so on, the spoon evolved into the fork. And you can see right there the progression of the handles, very similar. Halfway through, it still looks the same, but then we get these grooves get deeper over time. And then here we go. There it is. Beautiful. The evolution of the fork. But as I was looking at this in more detail, I thought, you know what? This is too big of a jump between these two. There's got to be something in between. I knew I had a missing link, and I was trying to figure out what that missing link was. Don't get ahead of me. And so I got hungry, and I went to Kentucky Fried Chicken, placed my order, and the lady just handed me the missing link. What did she hand me? That's right, the fork. Discovered at Kentucky Fried Chicken where all good things are discovered. That should be their new slogan, I'm convinced. So there it is, the beautiful evolution of the fork. You can even explain the so-called races if you want. It's not hard to do. There you go. Look at that. I'll stop, all right? But you get the idea. So just because I can take things and arrange them in a particular order and tell a story to go with that order, does that prove my story is true? Not at all, right? You start the wrong assumptions, you'll get the wrong conclusions. What do we actually observe with the rock layers and fossils? Well, here's what we see. We see billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. Since there was a global flood described in the book of Genesis, we expect to find billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. Tremendous confirmation of the Bible's historicity. And so summary evidence for this idea of macroevolution, we don't see it in the present, we don't see it in the fossil record, and there's not even an observable mechanism in the present to make it plausible. We'll get to that here in a moment. But I want you to notice something. These first four meanings to the word evolution are believed by faith. None of them have ever been observed. Actually, you might even call it a blind faith because they're believed by faith in spite of all the laws of science they break. But that leads us to the last possible definition to the word. I don't like this definition or this title for this definition. I think it's confusing and deceptive at worst, honestly. But it is something some people call microevolution. And this is the idea of variations within a kind. We simply call this at the ministry adaptation, speciation, variation. That's what it is, microevolution. It's the idea that lizards will make other sorts of lizards, right? All kinds of variations, but they're always still lizards, bigger, smaller, different colors, but they're still lizards. And this is what the Bible teaches from the very beginning. Genesis 1, 10 times. God made distinct types of plants and animals to reproduce according to their kind. And the word kind is equal to about the family level of modern day classification. So according to the Bible, God made the dog kind, and the dog kind produces variations of what? Dogs. Elephants make variations of what? Cats make what? Unfortunately, right? But you get the idea. Sorry, all right? But for example, whether you're talking about dogs, like my dog, Samson, a Great Dane, that's a big dog. Or you're talking about the Chihuahua. That's a little dog, but they're both still dogs, I think. Does the Chihuahua count? I'm not really sure. I'm just kidding, all right? And horses, you can get tons of variations within the horse kind. You can make zorses and zedonks. Here's a zebra with no PJs, kind of sad, all right? There's a zedonk. That's the one we have at the petting zoo. This is the zorse that we have. You can make lepons if you would like. You could breed lions and leopards. They're the same kind of animal. You can even make ligers if you want. Those are real creatures. You can breed a lion and a tiger. Why? Because they're the same kind of animal, part of the cat kind. You see, variations happen, but they do have limits. Think about it like this. Farmers have been trying to breed bigger pigs for a really long time. Will they ever get a pig as big as Texas? No, there's a limit in there somewhere. They might get that maybe when this happens. I don't know. But hey, if there aren't limits, why not breed wings on your pigs and make them fly? That would be incredible, right? But there are limits. Roaches do become resistant to pesticides through a loss of genetic information, but will they ever become resistant to a sledgehammer? Let's hope not. Exactly right. It's going to be a really bad day. So variations happen, of course. But what causes these variations in our Genesis 3 fallen world? Good question. I'm glad you asked it. Two main things that cause these variations in our fallen world today: natural selection and mutations. And guys, no rational, informed person argues that things don't change. Of course they change. The questions are twofold. How much do they change? And which direction is that change going? Is it an onward, upward progression that changes a molecule into a man, a fish into a philosopher? Or is it maybe a mixing and a loss of information over time? What do we actually observe? And here's the key. In order for natural selection and mutations to lead to the idea of macroevolution, changing one kind to another, they must add brand new genetic information over time. Must. Because think about this example. If you're going to change a dinosaur into a bird, you need brand new genetic information, don't you? New information for new eyes, new lungs, new heart, new bone structure, new wings, new instincts, new eyes, new everything. And that requires brand new, specified, complicated genetic information. If these two things don't add that over time, it's impossible for them to lead to macroevolution, making it biologically and genetically impossible. So let's talk about these two things very quickly. Natural selection. It's the idea of survival of the fittest. We're familiar with the term. Does not explain arrival of the fittest, though. It's essentially the ability of organisms to adapt to their environment through genetic variation. And the reason we can see so much adaptation and variation within living creatures is because of the amazing amount of genetic information inside living organisms. We truly can't comprehend it, but I'll give you an illustration to try to bring the point home. For example, the estimated number of atoms in the universe is 10 to the 80th power. That's a 1 followed by 80 zeros. It's a number beyond our comprehension. But that number is nothing compared to this number. Because of the amazing amount of genetic information inside of human beings, it's been estimated that the number of children that one man and one woman could have, one at a time, without any two of those kids being genetically the same, is this number. 10 to the 2017th power. And you thought you had a big family, right? And think about it. God put that kind of variability into the dog kind, into the bird kind, into the cat kind, into the humans as well. And that's why we see so much variation within living organisms. So to get to the question quickly, can natural selection lead to macroevolution? And guys, even most secular scientists agree the answer is no. Why? Because natural selection does not add new genetic information. It just works on what's already there. It's kind of like nature's quality control. Give you an example. Let's say you got two dogs who get off Noah's Ark, and they get married and have kids, and their kids get married and have kids, and their kids get married and have kids, and you end up with a typical homeschooling family. Now, I'm homeschooling, it's okay, all right? Population builds up. Population will spread out. Different combination of genes will survive better in different environments. But let's say the original two parents for this population had genetic information for S, short hair, and L, long hair. It's more complicated than this, but the principles do hold true. Of course, these parents could produce multiple variations. They could pass on both short hair genes and make dogs with really short hair, pass on a short hair gene and a long hair gene and make dogs with medium length hair, or pass on both long hair genes and create hairy. Everybody with me? Not that hard, right? So let's say a segment of this population goes up north where it is cold with these different variations. Well, in that environment, the dogs with short hair and medium length hair, they will get cold, they will freeze, and then die. If that makes you sad, they can move away, all right? Whatever works for you, either way, after a while, those dogs are no longer in that environment. You just have dogs with long hair, which on their own produce dogs with long hair. That is natural selection in action. Now notice, through that process, did you add or lose genetic information? You lost it, right? You lost the information for short hair. And by the way, if the environment changes to a warm environment, that guy's in trouble. He can no longer adapt. Big problem. Or think about the opposite. If some dogs go where it's hot, in that environment, the dogs with long hair and medium length hair, they will overheat and die or move away, all right? And after a while, you just have dogs with short hair, which only produce dogs with short hair. Again, that's natural selection. Again, that's a loss of information, not a gain. And so through this process, we see all sorts of variations. And so we do see animals change, no question about that. Dogs change, but they were dogs, they are dogs, they will be dogs. That's not evolution, that's just dogs. That's what the Bible has said from the very beginning, variation within a kind. And again, most evolutionists will even acknowledge that. Yes, natural selection cannot do it, but they will say, there is something out there that does add the brand new information we need to change a molecule into a man. And that amazing thing is called mutations. Like this textbook says, mutations are the original source of variation within a population. So what are these amazing things called mutations? Well, you might be surprised to know that the classic definition for mutation is when genetic information is damaged or changed. They are random, rare, mostly harmful. Very often, they are lethal. This secular scientist says, the great majority of mutations, well over 99%, are harmful in some way, as is to be expected from accidental occurrences. Mutations are accidents within your genome. Question from your life experience. When you or one of your kids has an accident, does that tend to make things more organized or less? Usually less, right? If accidents were good, we'd be having them all the time. I'd be dropping all sorts of stuff, right? But accidents tend to be bad. They make things disorganized. This scientist says no matter how numerous mutations may be, they do not produce any kind of macroevolution. Why? Because they rearrange or delete existing genetic information. They do not add it. I'll give you an example from wordplay. Take the word Christmas, delete some of the letters, combine some of those letters. You can make all sorts of words. Has, Matt, Sam, Ram, and so forth, but you would never get the words Xerox, zebra, or queen. The letters just aren't available. Some practical examples. Here's a 5-legged bull. No new information, just a repeat of what he already had and detrimental to his health. Here is a short-legged sheep. No new information, actually a loss of information, and that poor guy is going to be the first one that the wolf eats because you can't run but so fast with those little legs, all right? Here's a 2-headed turtle. It is mutant. It's not ninja, but it's mutant. That's more for the kids out there if there's some watching, all right? And then, like this quote says from this secular scientist, not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information. Indeed, they all destroy information. None can serve as an example of macroevolution. This is a devastating argument against the idea of evolution. And I want you to hear how Richard Dawkins responds to this argument. He was asked in an interview to give one example of a mutation that adds genetic information. And I don't often agree with the atheist, but I think he nails it this time. Listen to what he says.
Can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
He's right so far. Amen.
Can you just stop when I think...
I think I need some Jeopardy music as that plays, right? But yeah, he nails it. And again, I'm not trying to pick on Mr. Dawkins there, or Dr. Dawkins, I should say. He's a very smart guy. But again, he has no answers. Why? Because he's starting with the wrong assumptions. That's really what it is. It's not a head issue. It is a heart issue. And some people say, okay, but what about bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics? And isn't that evolution in action? And this secular scientist says, no. The mutations that cause this resistance still involve information loss, not gain. I'll give you one example as we're starting to round third here and come home with this. H. pylori, a mean little critter, does bad stuff to humans, so we needed to kill H. pylori. I'll call it HP for short. And here's how we did it. We gave it an antibiotic that would be absorbed through its cell wall. Now, once it went through the cell wall, we knew inside of HP it contained things called enzymes. And enzymes break stuff down. And we knew these enzymes would break down the antibiotic, and that would release the poison we had placed inside of the antibiotic and would kill HP from the inside out. Everybody with me? Pretty straightforward, right? And it was working really, really well until we ran into HP's mutant cousin. And HP's mutant cousin, we'll call him Henry. Henry did not have the enzyme all the normal HPs had. So here's what happened. Since he didn't have the enzyme all the normal HPs had, when he absorbed the antibiotic through his cell wall, it went inside with the poison still inside the antibiotic. But since there was no enzyme, there was no breaking down the antibiotic. Therefore, there was no conversion over to poison. Therefore, Henry survives. Ha, ha, ha. No enzyme, no conversion to poison, no death. Now, notice, did he survive because he had more information or less? He had less. He did not have the enzyme all the normal bacteria have, and typically that'd be very detrimental, and he'd be the first one to die off. But in that environment, with the antibiotic present, it happens to be beneficial, but still a loss of genetic information. And since they reproduce very quickly, the mutant cousins take over the population, and the normal ones die off in that environment. And again, guys, all we ever see with natural selection and mutations are new combinations of already existing genetic information with less variability than they started with, and that's the opposite of what you would need for the idea of macroevolution. And people say, okay, yeah, all right, but just give it enough time, and all those small changes will add up to big changes. But guys, notice, these small changes, they're subtracting over time. They're not adding. Give it all the time you want, they're going in the wrong direction. And I love this quote from this secular scientist to bring this home, who says, "Whoever thinks macroevolution can be made by mutations that lose information is like the merchant who lost a little money on every sale, but thought he could make it up with volume." That's not good economics, right? Same thing with this idea of evolution. So do animals evolve? We'll define your terms. This is very, very important that we do this, especially as we talk with people about this issue, whether it's friends or families or strangers. Define your terms. If you mean by evolution, are you talking about variations within a kind, what some people call microevolution, adaptation, speciation? We all agree on that. That is what the Bible teaches, and it's what we observe. No problems there. But if you're talking about what some people call macroevolution, that one kind changes to a whole different kind, no, we definitely don't believe that. That's not what the Bible teaches, and it's never been observed. Actually, it's believed by faith in spite of the facts. And micro will not lead to macro because they're going in opposite directions. And here's the thing. Typically, as a ministry, if you read our literature, the books, or watch the DVDs, we don't usually parse out the term evolution. We just say the word evolution implied the whole theory, or we might say molecules to man evolution. But here's why I did it today, because I want to show you something. I want to show you how multiple generations now, and millions of people today, especially kids, are in a sense being deceived into believing evolution must be true, and therefore the Bible's history must be false. What's being used today in our textbooks, on science channels like the Discovery Channel, National Geographic, Nova, they're using a logical fallacy called equivocation, or bait and switch. And what happens in that particular scenario is when, in the course of an argument, you take a word, and the first time you use that word, you mean one thing to make your point. And then later on in that same argument, you take that word and use it again, but the second time you use it, you mean something else, but you use a new definition to prove your point. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This is what you're going to see all the time in your textbooks, on your science shows, so forth and so on. They're going to say, we know evolution is true. And the first time they said a theory, they implied the whole theory. Molecules to man, maybe even Big Bang, the whole theory. All life shares a common ancestor. We know that whole theory is true. Macroevolution is true. You're crazy if you don't believe it. Okay. Well, then what is the evidence for that grand claim? How do you know it's true? Well, because we see evolution happening all the time. And the second time they use the word, they mean variation, adaptation, speciation, what some call microevolution. They say, look at all these bacteria producing all these variations of bacteria. That proves we all came from rock billions of years ago. Look at Darwin's finches making all these variations of what? Finches. That proves we all have a common ancestor from billions of years ago, so forth and so on. It's a bait and switch on the meaning of the word evolution. Let me give you a great example of this. I want to show you a clip from the movie Evolution versus God. This is done by Ray Comfort. He does some phenomenal stuff. I love the video, 30 minutes long roughly, gives the gospel at the end. Great way to get the gospel out there. But in this video, he's interviewing science majors at secular colleges and their professors. And he's asking for evidence of what he calls Darwinian evolution. And what he calls Darwinian evolution, we just defined as macroevolution. One kind changes to another. And listen to the evidence they give him. It's the same thing over and over again, just variations within a kind. And it's almost like they're brainwashed because they say the exact same thing. Listen to what happens.
When you say change of kinds, you mean the evolution of one species from another or to another. Yes, we have that in action, actually, in the Galapagos.
Could you give me one instance?
Yes, we have an example from a group of birds called Darwin's finches.
You take a look at the difference between the finches on the islands that all started out. I mean, that's very, very observable.
But that's not Darwinian evolution. There's been no change of kinds. What do the finches become?
They become genetically new and anatomically new, recognizably different species.
So they're still finches?
Well, of course, they're still finches, yes.
So they're not a change of, there's no change of kind.
Little birds that he had observed that...
What did they become?
Their beaks, their beak shapes.
They're still birds?
Yes.
3 finches that turn into different types of birds based
They're still finches?
Well, for example, Darwin and his study on evolution of the birds on the island that he went on to there.
Their beaks changed?
Their beaks.
They're still birds. There's no change of kinds. That's within the kind.
Just evolution on the beaks.
So that's called adaptation. It's not Darwinian evolution. There's no change of kinds. There's no different animal involved. I want something that shows me Darwin's belief in a change of kinds is scientific.
I think he might have just blown her mind, all right? Look at her face there. But in case the finches did not convince you, this professor will convince you that evolution is true with a stickleback fish.
The scientific method must be observable and repeatable. So could you give me one piece of observable evidence for Darwinian evolution?
Okay, I would point to, as one great example is look at the genetics of the stickleback.
What's that?
So stickleback fish are a very interesting collection of species that were recently isolated after the end of the Ice Age.
What did they become?
They're various species of sticklebacks.
They stayed as fish?
Well, of course.
The bottom line, when you start with the wrong assumptions, you can even make good observations and still get the wrong conclusions. This reminds me of some scientists who wanted to see how high a frog could jump as they progressively cut off its legs one at a time. I know it sounds mean, but it's in the name of science, all right? So they took a frog, they put him on the ground with all 4 legs, and they said, jump, frog, and he jumped 80 inches with 4 legs. They picked up the frog, cut off 1 leg, put him back on the ground, and they said, jump, frog, and with 3 legs, he jumped 70 inches. They picked him up, cut off 1 more leg, put him back on the ground. They said, jump, frog, and with 2 legs, he jumped 60 inches. They picked him up, cut off 1 more leg, put him back on the ground. They said, jump, frog, and with 1 leg, he jumped 50 inches, which is impressive. They picked the frog up, cut off the last leg, no more legs, put it back on the ground, and they said, jump, frog. They expected he might jump 40 inches based on the progression of the data. Actual jump was 0, so they yelled louder, jump, frog. Frog did not move. They yelled even louder, jump, frog. Frog did not move. They were baffled. So they tried the experiment again, with a new frog, and they got the same results every time. So they took their data, they put it together, they said, you know what? The frog jumped less as the legs were removed. Which is a good observation, I guess, right? But then they concluded that a frog with no legs goes deaf. It's early. Some of y'all get that later on, all right? Bad conclusion. Same thing within secular scientific community today. The good observation that things do change through natural selection and mutations. Then the very bad conclusion that those changes that lose information can somehow add up and create big changes over long periods of time. Your conclusions are only as good as your starting assumptions. And I hope you noticed this morning that when we stand on the authority of God's word, we can answer the skeptical questions of this age. We see that real science rejects evolutionary ideology and it confirms what we read from God's word from the very first verse. And if we stand, we can be obedient to God's call to be ready to give an answer for the hope that we have, defending the faith, and then sharing the gospel boldly to secular culture. And let me just say this, as you go through the museum and go through the ark and come to different sessions, and you get equipped with these answers, we need these answers for our day and age to engage the culture, but recognize it doesn't stop at the answers. I like to put it like this. We use these answers to get to the answer, Jesus Christ. Because let's recognize, if we go out and engage that friend or that family member or that stranger, and we're debating over evolution and millions of years and dinosaurs, and we share our answers, let's say we convince them that evolution is indeed not true, that dinosaurs did live with man, the earth is roughly 6,000 years old, Noah's flood laid down the rock layers and fossils, and they buy all that, but you never share the gospel and they're not saved, where are they still going? Hell. You see, if we give all these answers and that's it, we're wasting our time. We give these answers to till the ground of the heart of the believer to get it ready for the seed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the gospel that is the power of God unto salvation. So we use these answers to get to the answer, Jesus Christ. That is the heartbeat behind what this ministry is about, and that's the heartbeat of what we should be doing as Christians. Because if you think about it, I would like for you to raise your hand if you're in this room right now and you are a missionary. Will you please raise your hand? It's a tricky question, right? But you get the idea. How many missionaries are in here? Every single one of us. We've all been called to share the gospel as we go to work, as we go to school, as we go around our neighborhood, as we go overseas, wherever we go, we're all called to share the gospel. We are here to know God and to make him known. That's what this is all about. And that's why all of this is so important for our day and age. Let me share some resources with you to help you do just that, to obey that call God has placed on our lives. You know, here's the thing. I would love for you to be able to walk out of here and repeat everything I just said, word for word. Not going to happen. I can't do that with the other speakers, right? It's just too much information. And so we want to equip you with books and DVDs and resources you can go back to remind yourselves and further educate yourselves and share these answers with others so you can defend your faith. The book, The Lie, it's a foundational textbook of our ministry. It's why all of this is so important, how it relates to our culture today and the undermining of biblical authority and the collapsing Christian worldview we witnessed right before our very eyes, and how to counteract all of that. The book Already Gone, why are 2/3 walking away from the faith, and what can we do to stop it? According to multiple stats, 2/3 of kids who grow up in the church are walking away from the faith by the time they reach college age. How do we counteract that? Why is that happening? This DVD, The Genesis of the Gospel, this is one of my DVDs. This is the most important talk I do. This lays the foundation for all the other talks. Why do we need answers about Cain's wife and the 8 men and dinosaurs and evolution and rock layers and fossils? Why is that important? We lay the foundation in that DVD, recognizing what is taking place. In a sense, I take the book The Lie and the book Already Gone and kind of squeeze that information into a talk, and it just really lays the foundation for why all of this is important. If you know someone who needs to understand why it's important, that's the DVD you want to look at. The Answers books 1 through 4, if you had to buy just one resource while you're here, this is what I would strongly suggest. Each book answers 25 to 35 different questions. And each chapter is a different question, so you can jump around and read them out of order and use them as a reference tool. It's they're great books. They're some of the best-selling apologetics books in the entire world. They're so well done. It gives you nice, concise answers. We got those for teens and for kids as well, written at their levels. We got this newer book edited by Bodie Hodge, Confound the Critics. This was kind of unique in that it takes a bunch of questions that have been emailed to the ministry, and we responded to them in about a one-page answer. So it gives you a short, quick answer to a lot of different questions. And so it's a great resource to give you just a snappy answer to a big question. So it's a good new resource. I encourage you to check that out. And of course, for kids, we got My Creation Bible. I'm reading that with my son right now. It's a great book for the younger kids. Or what about the 8 men? I really, really want to learn about 8 men. A great book for, again, the younger kids. For the kids, teenagers, and ADD adults, we have DVDs of all sorts, all right? The Answers DVDs 1, 2, and 3, phenomenal resources. Each one answers around 10 to 15 different questions, around 3 or 4 minutes per answer. The closest DVD we have right now to this talk's not recorded yet. It will be actually this Friday, I believe. But the closest one right now is Science Confirms the Bible by our president and CEO, Ken Ham, a phenomenal DVD. And he covers so many issues. It's so well done. So I encourage you to check that one out if this kind of thing resonated with you. Also, the DVD, Check This Out 6 mini videos, also a really good resource for teaching this to yourself or to teens, anyone, really good resource. Evolution versus God, we have that available as well. This is, again, really good for not only getting answers, but also giving to someone so they can hear the gospel. Dr. Purdom later on will give this talk at some point. I'm not sure if it's today or tomorrow, but if you don't see it, get it on DVD. It's phenomenal. The genetics of Adam and Eve, so well done. And if I had time, I would have talked about the 8 men, but I'm talking too fast already, trying to cover so much stuff. Dr. David Minton does a phenomenal job with the 8 men issue in that DVD, 3 Ways to Make an 8 Man. And of course, we got the museum special while you're here. And in the magazine, cannot fail to mention that. Literally has won so many awards. It's my wife's favorite resource. It is so well done. There's a kids section inside each one that kids love, scientifically proven, because there's my son reading at 15 months, because he's advanced, right? He's not actually reading. But anyway, if you spend $75 or more, you get a free 1-year subscription to the magazine. And then we got the Begin book for sharing the gospel for $3. And then we got pocket guides, great resources for $2 a piece. Really encourage you to check those out. Sign up for the free news updates that comes in the mail or through email. We don't share your information. It's a great way to just keep abreast of what's happening in the ministry. And then if you like free stuff, some people do, go to answersingenesis.org. Thousands of free articles, layman to technical, hundreds of free videos right there on the website at your disposal, and it's so well done. Encourage you to check that out. And then you can follow me or the other speakers on Facebook or Twitter. I do a blog as well that comes up on the website or on my Facebook page, and you can keep up with that. And you can bring a speaker to your church. We have multiple speakers. I'm one of those. And we as a ministry, we literally travel all over the world, doing conferences at events, at churches, at pastors' conferences, at all sorts of stuff, at camp. So if you are wanting to bring a speaker to your event, talk to me, talk to the museum staff. We'll get you started in the right direction. It's very doable. We like to make it happen. So talk with us about that. And I could go on, but I'll leave you with one last quote, and then we'll turn over to the guest services. And after this quote, after I pack up, give me around 3 minutes. If you want to chat for a little bit outside or hang out, just talk. Love to talk with you guys, so just come see me out there. We'd love to talk. But I want to leave you with this last quote, a quote by an atheist. Because what we have found as a ministry is that the atheists really seem to understand what's going on. And in many cases, we as Christians need to catch up with that understanding. Listen to what this atheist has to say regarding this issue of evolution, so forth and so on. He says, the most devastating thing, though, that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. If there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, there's no need of salvation. If there's no need of salvation, there's no need of a Savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. And I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. They recognize where the battle is today. It's time we recognize as well. Let's be ready to answer the questions, defend the faith, and share the gospel boldly. And before I go, real quick, I saw my friend Tommy Mitchell just walk in the back. Dr. Mitchell, wave to everybody. Are you speaking next, sir? What are you speaking on?
I can't remember. Evolution, the eyes don't have it. Evolution, the eyes don't have it.
You did have a late flight. Yeah. What time did you get in yesterday? Wow. Okay. Yeah, Delta's great, right? All right. Well, he speaks at 11, correct?
Oh, no,
10:30. Wow.
10:30. I'll be right after you.
I'm running into your time. I'm sorry, brother. All right. So, wonderful talk coming up. Love on the death. Be sure you make time to come and check out this talk. Really good stuff. Have a great day. God bless. All right.